I want to tell you a
Sorry.
okay, no problem. So glad to see everybody. Okay, I want to begin by we've gone over what we've got coming up in the way of December and January. Today's book, Lucy by the Sea, is by Elizabeth Strout. How many of you have read books by Elizabeth Strout before?
Oh,
Anybody?
I read many of them.
Good. Olive Kittredge, Olive
Yeah.
Again. We did Olive
Oh,
Kittredge, by
I
the way,
love
as a group, right? You remember that? My name
I've
is Lucy.
read most of them.
Okay, you have read most of them. Okay, great.
Yes, I love them.
Good. Well, I'm with you. Elizabeth Strout was born in Portland, Maine. Her father was a science professor and her mother was a high school writing teacher. She graduated from Bates College. She spent a year at Oxford and she went to law school, graduated from Syracuse with a law degree and also a certificate in gerontology, which I think, by the way, is very much reflected in her work, right? In terms
all
of
her books.
how she is, right? All her books. She moved to New York City. She wrote stories that were published in literary magazines, as well as magazines like Red Book and 17. But it took her about 6 or 7 years until she finally wrote Amy and Isabel. And that book was shortlisted for the 2000 Orange Prize. It was nominated for the 2000 Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction. And it was made into a television movie produced by Oprah Winfrey. She became a professor of creative writing at Colgate in 2007, and she was on the faculty MFA program at Queen's University in Charlotte, North Carolina. In 2009, she won the Pulitzer Prize for Olive Kittredge, which, as you remember, was a collection of stories about a woman and her immediate family and friends on the coast of Maine. And of course, we know that Olive shows up again, right? A little cameo appearance in this book. At that point, 5 years later, she went ahead and published The Burgess Boys, also a bestseller, and then My Name is Lucy Barton, also topping the bestseller list. Lucy Barton became a main character again in the book Anything is Possible, which came out in 2017. In 2019, she came up with Olive Again. And then, of course, she wrote the book Oh, William. And what's interesting about her is that she loves writing stories about people's lives. One of the things she keeps repeating in a lot of interviews is she just loves to get into people's lives. She loves to know what it's like to get under their skin and to be in their heads. And for that reason, she loves eavesdropping. She loves hearing parts of conversations, and then she makes up the rest of it when she's writing her stories. And she loves cell phones. I love this because in cell phones, she always is hearing parts of people's conversations, and it's been a rich place for her to get her in for her stories. She loves what people reveal to each other because it sparks her imagination. Okay, so she writes about the interior lives of people, and she writes very descriptively about Maine, right? So those are the things we want to say about her. Okay, so the summary, very briefly, it's a panicked world of when the virus comes. Now, remember, this is a story that takes place during COVID. And by the way, she tells this. I love the way she came up with this story. She says she had just finished writing the book, Oh, William. And in her head were these characters of Lucy and William. And she was now thinking about what to write for a new book. And COVID was starting and she was isolated and she was stuck in the house. And she thought to herself, you know what? I wonder how Lucy and William would do in this situation. And she began to think about, you know what? Let me take them there. And that's what she did. She continued to write about Lucy and William because they were still in her head at that point. So what we see is that Lucy is struggling with this disbelief as COVID is coming. And of course, in some cases, it's actually killing acquaintances of hers. She is also mourning the second husband that adored her. His name was David. He was a Philharmonic cellist. He had died only a year earlier. And also, she now has her ex-husband, William Gerhardt, who's really remained a good friend of hers. And he is a scientist, and he sees what's coming, and he evacuates her to a rented house on the wind-cradled, sea-bitten New England coast. William's motivation, he says, is simple. He wants to get Lucy out of harm's way. He wants to save her life. Now, picture William is still reeling from a third divorce. His third wife has left him, right? She was a younger woman and she left with their 10-year-old child, which he is having a lot of trouble getting over. So picture he also now finds out through ancestry testing, like, ancestor.com or one of those, he has this recent discovery of a previously unknown sister. So picture this guy, now COVID is coming. He doesn't know much about it, but he sees it's this incoming global health crisis. And he wants to save Lucy, who is a very renowned novelist. And she can't understand why he's insisting she move out of New York City, move to Maine. And she says this quote, "It's odd how the mind does not take anything in until it can." Now, picture that you've also got these daughters. They've got Chrissy, who's married to Michael, who's asthmatic. They're worried about him with COVID. And then she's got another daughter, Becca, who's married to Trey. He's a poet, and he does not want to leave. He wants to stay in New York City, in Brooklyn, where they live. Okay, so that's just like, now we're going to see about their relationships, how everybody is affected by COVID. So let me ask you this. Let me ask you, what did you guys think of the book? Did you enjoy reading it? So?
I
Okay.
liked it a lot.
Carol,
I liked it a lot.
you liked it a lot. It's interesting when I've asked that question to a lot of people who've read the book. It ranges from exactly, Lenny, what you said, the so-sos, to Carol, people that really liked it a lot. And, it's an interesting book, and I'm hoping that after we speak about it, you'll even enjoy it a lot more. I want to begin by talking about her style of writing because Elizabeth Strout is considered to be a very fine writer. What did you think? How would you describe her style of writing? Hi, Sandra. I see you joining us. Great.
Sort of natural, just goes with the flow, like just people talk. I don't know.
Okay. It's people talk. Great
Yeah.
way of putting it. It's conversational.
Yeah.
It's straightforward.
It flows.
You feel like you're having a cup of tea with you
Yeah.
and she's sharing some stories with you, right?
That's how I see it. Yeah.
Yeah. What else do you want to say about it? What?
There was
Come a little closer to the mic. Who's speaking? Okay. Is that background noise or is somebody speaking to us? Okay. Mute yourself if you've got anybody else in the room who's talking to you guys. Okay. Okay. All right. So a couple things to note about her writing. She's very descriptive, and I want to tell you that I loved her descriptions, and I'll give you a sample. I noticed how in the afternoons, she's talking about what she's seeing in Maine, how clouds start to come in as if they were gently autumnal, like it's autumn, right? They made the world look quietly soft, as though it was getting ready to tuck itself in for the night. What a wonderful thing the physical world is. I love that image of the idea of fall as if it's getting ready to tuck itself in for the night. It's very talented writing. And then there's another one that I thought I wanted to bring out. Lucy is talking about when she meets her friend Charlene, okay? And Lucy notes, quote, "There was a faint odor of loneliness that came from Charlene. And the awful truth is this. It had made me draw back just slightly inside myself, and I knew this was because I had always been afraid of giving off that odor myself." What a great way to describe it, right? The idea of loneliness. The other thing I noticed about her writing is foreshadowing. Did you guys notice the foreshadowing? She says things like, "If I had known what was in store for Becca, I would not have felt any resentment for Bridget." So in other words, I read it and thought, oh my God, what happens to Becca, right? As you're reading. She says about Becca, she says that, they rescued her. That was the first rescue. But in the end, neither of her rescues was successful. So in other words, you've got this foreshadowing going on. I loved also that she shares her observations about things, about loss and regret. And she says, she's talking about her daughters. "If I had known what it would be like the next time I saw them, well, I did not know then. It is a gift in this life that we do not know what awaits us. I love that. I love that she's thinking and she shares her observations with us. So, what would you say are the themes in the book?
Friendship,
Absolutely.
maybe loneliness,
Loneliness,
parenting, survival.
parenting, survival. What else? All of these are her themes. These are her takeaways that she wants us to see. Anything else? How about marriage? And for
Marriage.
me, the big one was relationships because she forms relationships with all those secondary characters at the end, right? She's really into relationships. What do we know of Lucy? Describe her to me. Like, what adjectives would you use? What was she? What did you think of Lucy? Well, first of all, we know she's mourning David, right? She misses him. She's confused about what's happening in the world, right? And we know about her childhood. It was what?
She was very poor.
Very
and had a lot of insecurities.
That's right.
Abuse. There was a lot of
There was abuse.
emotional, physical.
Absolutely. Both a physical, emotional abuse. Insecurity, you mentioned, Sandra. That is so true. She has a great deal of insecurity. She was impoverished in her youth. What else about her?
She's
Yeah.
socially awkward.
Very socially awkward. Yeah, she was socially uncomfortable, right? Uncomfortable. She at times she's also very frightened. She tells us she's a frightened person. In fact, it's funny because Bob Burgess says to her, "You're not a frightened person. Don't say that. You came from hard circumstances, and look what you've accomplished." He says to her, "You know, you wrote books. You married a guy who was this David who adored you. You aren't a frightened person. You've really moved forward." But she sees herself as being a frightened person, always frightened about doing the wrong thing, about doing something that was inconsiderate. What else about her? You know what I really thought about a lot? She was pretty needy in certain ways. And the major need that was never really fulfilled for her was the need for her mother.
Right. Could I just say something?
Yeah.
She's conflicted about her mother to the point that she loves her. She says she's calling out to her when she has problems, but then she refers back to the childhood that she had. But
Right.
I didn't realize that this was the second book. So then I went and read the book.
My name is Lucy Barton.
Yeah, but you didn't need to read. But her writing is so easy to read.
Yeah.
And I don't usually read a book that fast, but I read both of those books, like one right after the other in no time.
Right. And so you see how conflicted she is. In fact, she was still so needy for a mother that she made up a mother, right? She made up the nice mother.
Good mother, nice mother.
The good mother, right? Which was so sad, right? Because she called on this good mother who was going to say to her, "Good job. You know, you're doing fine. Things are going to work out okay." All the things that a mother would be reassuring, you know, which she did not obviously have from her real mother. And we later on learned that the mother was quite abusive, right? At the end of this book. Okay, so she needed a mother so much she made one up. She has a lot of mood swings. And I love the way she's like, sometimes she really likes William, and sometimes she doesn't like him, right? So she has a lot of I love the part where she says, she tells William this story that while she was waiting in the car for him when he went to the grocery store, a woman yelled at her. When he comes back, she says, "Oh, William, it was terrible. This woman yelled at me. I hate that when people yell at me." And he looks at her and he says, "Well, you know what? So what if some lady yelled at you? Everyone hates it when somebody yells at them." Like, so he's impatient with her sometimes. But again, it's like this neediness, this insecurity that she has, that she would have even that kind of response. Lucy never felt that she mattered. That was really one of her problems. And she could make no sense of her life, you know, what was happening with COVID. What about William? What do you want to share about William? What are your thoughts about William? How would you describe him? Well, was he a likable guy?
He was protecting her by
Yeah.
getting her out of New York. But in some ways, I think he needed her. He needed someone. So I think in a way he was selfish.
Okay, so that's the question, why did he take her? Why did he take her to Maine?
Supposedly to get her out of New York, but I think
To
he didn't
save
want to
her.
he didn't want to go by himself.
Right?
And they had a good relationship after the divorce.
Right. So he was lonely. They had a good relationship. He wanted someone to be with him. And why does he choose Maine? Do you remember?
The friend, Bob, was that
Bob
why?
Burgess rented the house for them there. And also, coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, his sister lived there.
Sister
Right?
lived
The sister, you remember that? Okay. So what we know about William is that he's 71. He's kind of got this later, but it is a midlife crisis. The wife left him, took the daughter. He's got this sister, Lois Babar, that he never knew before. He believes Lucy is at risk. He convinces his daughters also to take care about the virus. And we learn about William's background. Do you remember the story with William's background? 14 when his father died. Do you remember that? His father had been a German soldier, a POW. Remember that? And he was working on a potato farm.
Yes, and he accepted money from his father where other members of the family didn't.
That's
and didn't
right.
seem to regret accepting the money.
And he took that money, which had been made. And why is it important? It was made by his German grandfather, who made it making submarines. So it was really to him dirty. It was really dirty blood money. And his father, William's father, inherited it, he didn't want any part of it. And he was upset when William accepted the money. But William took the money. He wanted the money and he took it. And later on, we're going to see where he feels very, very guilty that he took that kind of blood money. We know that he's terrified of the virus. He's always wearing masks and gloves. And what we see with him, and I think a lot of people that read this book, the people that just felt so about the book, I think they felt this was a little too close to COVID to appreciate the book. Did anybody have the feeling like, oh my God, I do not want to revisit this?
No,
No?
no.
I honestly think there were certain things I blocked in my brain that I didn't really remember until she brought it back to me. Do you remember when we wiped everything down and we washed our clothes after we went to the grocery store? We left our shoes at the door. We just, the outdoor shoes. And we were so really crazy with the worry about this virus. And she really kind of really brings that to life for us. But in many ways, he's a good guy because when it comes time to go to the grocery store, he insists she stay in the car. He's the one that goes out. He does a lot of very kind things for her. Their relationship is interesting. How did they first meet? Do you remember? He was actually a teaching assistant in her class in biology. And I love that he was the one, she says, that brought her into the world. Why? She was so poor growing up. He was the one who took her to her first movie. He was the one who took her to her first restaurant. He was the one who taught her about pop culture. She knew nothing. In fact, he told her this line from Groucho Marx, where Groucho Marx, I guess his woman is hugging him, and she says, "Get closer." And Groucho Marx answers, "If I get any closer, I'll be behind you." So he teaches her that line, and of course later we see where it shows up. So we know that they're married, they have these girls, these two children, and then he starts having affairs. So now they're brought together. COVID brings them together. They're isolated now in this house on a hilltop. What brings them together in the beginning? What do they share together? Well, they're both very lonely. They're both very lonely. He is a scientist. He knows what's coming. And what I also thought was very moving is that they share these daughters. And so what happened with these kids also brought them closer, right? They were sharing a lot of what went on with the girls. on the one hand, he annoyed her a great deal. She hated seeing his shoes on the floor, right? She hated that he would slurp when he was eating orange slices. And she hated that he didn't listen to her a lot when she was telling him a story after dinner or during dinner. And she thinks to herself, oh, he's not David, her husband who passed away. No. And not only isn't he David, he's not Bob Burgess, who we'll talk about. She becomes attracted to Bob, right? So she's thinking all these flaws in him. She admits herself that her feelings about him changed like the tides. So the question is, what were the good things he did? Do you remember? I mean, I thought it was funny because one of the reviewers on one of the interviews I watched with her, one of the reviewers said to the author, I have to admit something. I really have a crush on William. And the audience, that was all there, they all laughed. And she said, he was very sensitive. And yes, there were things that were very annoying about him. On the other hand,
He was helping getting the girls. He was trying to get the girls into safe places,
he was very interested in he was worried about his girls.
Yeah.
Worried about protecting the son-in-law who has asthma.
Yeah.
Right? So he was very much so like that. But also,
she was jealous that the girls would talk to him where she didn't know something about what was going on. So they confided in him sometimes where the mother didn't know what was happening.
Which really bothered her, right?
Yeah.
At different times. But I thought that he was really, when you think about it, when she was cold, remember the power went out one night and she was very cold. The next day he ordered and made sure that on her bed were 2 beautiful down quilts. He ordered a coat for her. Her coat she didn't have a winter coat. He surprised her with a coat that arrived. He was very kind in many ways. He really was very protective and really took care of her. And one of the things that was interesting was his relationship with this sister. Why was it so important, this relationship that he had with his sister?
Well, he never knew about her, right? He didn't even.
No.
So it was shocking when he found that he had a sister.
And he couldn't really forgive his mother readily because if you remember this story, so this POW father of his was German, serving his time. He was working as a POW in a potato farm in America. And while he's there, he falls in love with the woman who becomes his mother, the wife of the potato farmer. And if you remember the story, he goes back to Germany to kind of do his reparation or whatever he has to do. And while he's gone, she gives birth to a girl with the potato farmer. Right. And when the father comes back from Germany to be with the potato farmer's wife, guess what? She leaves the potato farmer, leaves the little girl, and moves on with the POW husband, the man, and they give birth together. Of course, they have William. So William really never even knew any of this story about the potato farm and the sister that was left behind, nothing, right? So he feels tremendous guilt that he never knew about her. And also, he was so lonely. Think about it, 3 marriages, all these affairs. This is a guy who just, for some reason, nothing was really connecting with him. And so, of course, he's he really needs this relationship with his sister. He's also drawn to the tower. Do you remember that there was a tower in the midst of outside their window in the ocean, in the water? He's drawn to this tower and he finds out about the tower. Do you remember anything about the tower? It was built in World War II. And it was interesting because one of the things is that it was built to look for submarines during World War II. So you right away see the connection that he had. They actually found 2 spies, German spies, that made it to shore in Maine, which is all this, by the way, is true. And they made it to the coast of Maine and they ultimately got into New York City. They were caught and they were convicted later, but he feels this amazing story because here his own father was a POW and his grandfather had made all this blood money off of building those terrible German submarines that killed so many Americans. So what we see with William is that he's sort of a complicated guy. if I was to say to you, what role do you think that COVID played in this story? What do you think? Well, it was really so important. It was almost like a character. Sandra, did you have something? I see Sandra. I see like a hand. No? Okay.
It was the whole background of the story.
Yeah,
It led the story.
it did.
That was, yeah.
Because when you think about it, all of these things were affected. Everything that happened was a result of the fact that this was COVID. So what were the things that happened during COVID? Well, what? We were all so isolated. We were all kind of hungry for relationships, hungry to, how about the fact that we couldn't hug each other? We couldn't hug our children. How scary is that? When you look back on that, do you remember all of us that were lucky enough, if we had kids in town, you had to stay so far apart from them with a mask on. Otherwise, you couldn't fly to be with them. I mean, it was terrible separation. All of us felt so lonely, so isolated. So how is it affecting the people in this story? Well, she's an author and she couldn't write. She didn't have the energy to write. She couldn't really read. She didn't have the energy for that. What did we do and what did she do during COVID? What was the one thing we all did during COVID?
Took walks. They walked a lot.
They walked, and they walked in the beginning totally separately, once in a while together. But where you see their relationships start to get together again, all of a sudden you start to see they're walking together more and more often, right? So COVID definitely is impacting sort of in a positive way, right? On their relationship, the fact that they've got this close, forced relationship. What else? I love the fact that it really changes Lucy, because Lucy in the very beginning, she comes to Maine, she looks at it, she says, you know what? I hate the snow. I hate the rain. I hate that it's gray outside. And finally he says to her, Lucy, we're in a lockdown. Stop hating everything. And as the story progresses, you start to see that she's adjusting. She's not hating as much. And all of a sudden she's finding real beauty in the ocean, right? Real beauty in the rocks, beauty in that she sees these little islands in the water, and they bring her comfort. So you see where she's changing. But what I remember us all doing and what she does, how about the fact that she's addicted to the TV? Were you guys not addicted to the TV at that time? Every night?
We were.
Every night we were watching the terrible, ghastly scenes.
Yeah.
What were we watching?
All the updates and
How many people were being killed and what people were encountering in hospitals. Yeah.
It
terrible.
was bringing back the scenes of the refrigerator trucks outside of buildings with the bodies inside. It was bringing back the images of the ERs, and she was seeing this, all the people that were on ventilators. And this is how, and she says she's the kind of person, she can't even look at it directly. She has to look away, right? She really looks away. Yeah, it's a lot for her. It's really a lot for her. Okay, by the way, for the people that are on my second screen, I'm not able to see you if you raise your hand. So if you want to chime in and talk, go right ahead, okay? Because I can't really see if your hand goes up. Okay. I love the fact that she starts to feel like Heidi, because all of a sudden she realizes she's stuck in this place in Maine and she can't go home again. She never realized when she left her apartment in New York that she would never be seeing it again, right? She doesn't even realize that. I love one of the lines that she says when she's looking at the refrigerator trucks and she has to look away. She's kind of looking at the floor, looking away because she can't keep watching the TV. She says, it's interesting how people endure things when they must. And I thought that was, she came up with a lot of things that we all kind of think about, but not necessarily articulate. So in her case, it's kind of bringing them together, COVID, which I'm sure it did for a lot of people. But what happened to Becca and Trey, the poet husband?
Separated.
He wanted a divorce, or he wanted a divorce, and
Right. So all of a sudden they're forced to stay together. And she says, Becca calls her mother and she says, you know what? It's terrible. He's so irritated. He's working from home. We're both working remote. He's in the living room. I'm in the bedroom. He says, I make too much noise. He's irritated. He's annoyed. And the next thing you know is, of course, he wants a divorce. He wants a divorce. He's having an affair. She finds out that he's having an affair. What she's also seeing at this point is that she's hearing stories about her friends. This one had a friend who passed away. That one had a friend who passed away. Also, there's people that have the virus that have lost their taste, lost their smell, had body aches, people that never left their apartments. And during the story, she talks about, like, oh my God, what must it have been like for these people that lived in little apartments with little windows? She at least was looking out and seeing the gorgeous ocean, right? But she felt such sympathy for all the people that were stuck in these very different situations, very stuck in their apartments. She talks about that she has this sadness in her chest and she's feeling the weather is so cold and so bleak, and that's what her mood is. And she's so anxious and she's starting to feel like, oh my God, thinking about her apartment, she almost doesn't want to go back to her apartment. She can't picture going back there. She becomes frightened even of that. Her mind is having trouble taking things in. She feels as if the world has become a different landscape, and she had to make it through each day without knowing when it would finally change, when things would stop. And she feels this great uneasiness. Do you remember this? Do you remember all of this during COVID? She does, I think, a really good job of bringing that back to us. And she's worried about her son-in-law who has asthma, right? There was another thing I thought was really interesting, and this is the kind of stuff that makes Elizabeth Strout, I think, such a fine writer. She uses the story, first she says, you know what, you really never knew in a pandemic when was going to be the last time you did something. You don't remember. What was the last time you did something, the last time you saw someone? And she uses this story, which it made me really think about this. When was the last time you remembered picking up one of your kids? All of us had the same situation where at some point you went to pick up your kid and all of a sudden you said, oh, honey, you're too big to be picked up. And so we stopped picking them up. And she says, it's such a shame you never really remember the last time you did something. You try to reflect back, but you can't. And of course, it comes from the idea that she was told about a man whose wife had Alzheimer's. And he struggled with this idea that he could never remember what were the last words that the woman spoke to him. And that's what makes her think about it. And she says, that's what it is. When you live in living with the pandemic, it was just like that. You really did not know when you did something last or when you would be doing something again. So here she is, she's in Maine. And yet, if you remember, what are her first reactions to coming to Maine? Do you remember?
Old, dreary.
Cold, dreary.
Yeah.
and she thinks it's temporary.
She thinks it's temporary. She keeps thinking to herself, I can get through the weekend. I can get through the, she doesn't want to believe that people, and she keeps asking questions. And I love this part. Her husband, who's her ex, William says to her, we don't know. Nobody knows. And that's the thing she finds so frustrating, that we probably all felt frustrating. Nobody really knew, right? Nobody knew what was going to be. What else? And again, this is her writing. She says, as they first drive in, she says, I gazed out the window of the car and I was amazed at what I saw. On both sides of the road was the ocean, but I had never seen anything like this before. Even with the overcast sky, it was unbelievably gorgeous to me. There were no beaches, just dark gray and brown rocks. spiky evergreen trees that seem to grow right on the rocky ledges. She sees the lobster boats. It was like a foreign country to me. Except in truth, foreign places always frighten me. I like places that are familiar. So what you see throughout the story with her is that on the one hand, she sees the positive, and then what? On the other hand, oh, but I don't like things that aren't, I like things to be familiar. So you see where she's always flipping. Her attitudes are always flipping. And one of the things I loved about this character, and I even loved it about William too, they are imperfect characters. They're just like all of us. They're as flawed as we all are, right? They have the same positives, the same negatives, and they're not perfect, but they're not perfect. And we see that with her. She looks outside, she has it. What's that? There's a sickness, actually. What do they call that when you have a seasonal, what? Dysphoria, seasonal something?
Depression. Seasonal depression.
Depression, yeah. When all of a sudden you're affected by the fact that it's a gray day versus a sunny day. And it really, your mood starts to match it. Well, she definitely has that. But picture, she's not really sure what this virus is all about. When they first arrive and they stop at Bob Burgess's house, he won't even get out of the car. They can't get out of the car and shake his hand. And William says, don't worry about it. He thinks we're toxic coming from New York. So remember that? We were scared of everything in those days, right? It wasn't that long ago. She looks at the house. She says, there's no other houses nearby, wooden, unpainted, weather-worn. The air smelled bitingly salty. She doesn't really like it. She says, it had been lovely once. And I love this line. She says, the truth is, I never have liked being in someone else's house. I've hated it. She hates the smell of other people's lives. I mean, her writing is really, she really colors things so well. She sees everything is free. She feels freezing dampness all around her, but she agrees that the rocks are beautiful. The water is beautiful. The truth is, she's not all that happy when she comes. He's rescued her, but she is not all that happy. She doesn't like the house. She doesn't like the cold. And she certainly isn't quite sure how she feels about William, because in the beginning, he felt very strange to her, very odd. It's been a long time since she was with him, right? And he's an alarmist about the virus. She doesn't like to feel alarmed. It makes her uneasy. And he looks strange to her. Do you remember he shaved off his big mustache, I guess, and she couldn't get used to that. So that was like a physical difference. And so he really seems odd to her in the beginning. And why that's interesting is that as the story progresses, she becomes more and more used to him. And of course, we see that the growth in their relationship. Okay. What's really important in the story is the relationship with her daughters. What do we know about Becca and Chrissy? What do you remember about Becca and Chrissy? Well, to refresh your memories, Becca is a lawyer with the ACLU. I'm sorry, Chrissy is the lawyer with ACLU, and Becca is a social worker, and she's working on Zoom. They're close with their parents, with kids. They're close with each other. We know that Trey is having an affair. And later we find out that Chrissy is contemplating an affair, right? She's ready to destroy her marriage. Both girls have taken on values of their generation. I love this part. They become very anti-materialistic. Remember that thing about Bloomingdale's? They no longer want to go to Bloomingdale's because of child labor and it's too materialistic. And Sandra, you went ahead and read Lucy Barton. But I guess in that book, if you remember, she always meets her daughters at Bloomingdale's, right?
Yeah, which I was surprised. Could you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was surprised because she came from such a poor background that would be the last place you'd think she would want to go. And she doesn't have the sense of style that someone maybe that grew up with money.
Yeah, except that William introduced her to a wonderful world. William introduced her to the real world. And of course, when she raises her kids, she's raising them in William's, in that world. But you're right, she came from such an impoverished, which might be also why she also appreciated Bloomingdale's in those days, right? Because it was something so special. So they have an interesting relationship with their girls. And I don't know about you, but I found that one of the most interesting parts of the book. Okay, so what do you think about that relationship? What struck you about the relationship with their daughters?
I think the fact he seemed very close to them also. And usually you don't think the father has that kind of relationship with a daughter.
Right. And she actually, Carol started to say this before, she starts to be, she's surprised by it in a way and a little bit hurt by it in a way. Like it sort of feels this little competition.
Well,
Why are they reaching out to him first?
right. Yeah.
But the kids really reach out to both of them, don't they? What I love is that Becca, when she first talks to Becca, Becca's in a bad mood. She says, "Oh, I kind of hate everything right now," she says to her mother, before Lucy knows about the affair. Lucy thinks it's understandable because of the violence and they have to share the house in a small apartment. She understands that. Of course, later she finds out the real reason Becca is so miserable. Becca shares with her that Trey is having an affair. But what I love is that she calls out for her mother on the phone. "Mommy, oh, mommy, he is having an affair." She's calling out to her mother, crying. And what's the worst thing for Lucy? Now, picture what's happening. Here's her daughter crying out. And what can't Lucy do because of COVID?
She
What?
can't hug them, get together. She can't.
Yeah. Unmute yourself, guys, if you're muted. Just call out, okay? Yeah, she can't. Karen, I think you said it. I could kind of read your lips. They couldn't touch each other. They couldn't reach out to each other. A horrific thing to not be able to hold each other at times like that. And what I loved is she's crying out for her mother at that point, right? She really needs her mother at that point. Lucy remembers how she felt the same way because she wanted to reach out to her mother. It was very primal. And of course, what we don't know is, where was Lucy's mother? Was it the good mother? The nice mother? Did she have to make up a mother, or did the real mother kind of come through? We don't know. But we know that she had to make up a mother. She was that needy, Lucy. What was cool, though, is that William also talks to the girls. So here she is. She's talking to her, "Mommy, mommy, it's so painful. I'm so unhappy." And then William gets on the phone and he asks the most precise questions. And he speaks to Trey and he says, "What have you done?" And remember what Trey says to him? "Oh, yeah? Well, you did the same thing to your wife, from what Becca tells me. And I don't think you should be throwing any stones from a glass house." And of course, his answer is great to Trey. He says, "Oh, yeah, I did, Trey. And you know what? I did it. And you know why I did it? Because I was an a-hole." I don't want to say any bad words. Okay. He says, "Welcome to the club. Why would you do that?" He says to him. Lucy is just filled with rage towards Trey. She's the mother. She feels this rage. And then what's interesting too is, why is she afraid of the rage that she's feeling? And this is where we get the feeling, Carol, I think you were the one that said she'd been abused.
Because of background, right?
She's feeling that rage and she's scared of it because of the background she came from.
Right.
She feels like she possesses that same rage that could ultimately lead to that kind of violence. She's scared to even see that in herself, right? But she feels this tremendous rage, this hatred towards Trey for the hurt that he had caused his daughter. So Becca is really grieving her marriage and the loss of her marriage. And of course, we know that Becca ultimately gets the virus. And how does she get the virus? Do you remember this?
Did they march somewhere, or did they?
Oh, she got together with Trey and she slept with him. Remember that? And then she says to her mother, "Oh, mommy, I did something so stupid."
Oh, that's right.
I don't know. I don't think Lucy ever really tells her, but she and William had done the same thing once they decided they were going to split. And then Lucy makes the comment that it's amazing how lots of people have done the same thing when they're trying to decide whether to divorce or not. They get together, that happens. Of course, in Becca's problem is that the bad news is the marriage still doesn't work out and she catches COVID, right? So that's it. So Lucy is the mother and she gets together with Chrissy on another occasion after COVID. And what does she sense right away? Something's up with Chrissy. By the way, she also finds out that Chrissy was pregnant and she's euphoric about that, and then Chrissy loses the baby. Why is that significant? It's her third miscarriage. So when she sees Chrissy, Chrissy tells her, actually, Chrissy never does tell her. She senses something, and she senses that her daughter is having an affair, Chrissy, or she's contemplating one. She looks at her daughter and she says, "Don't do it. Don't do it." And what she tries to explain to Chrissy is, why does Chrissy want to have this? Why does she want to have an affair? And remember, this is COVID. A lot of it was this background of COVID. What's happening? These kids are forced to sort of be together. What else? It's sort of like every flaw becomes magnified when you're isolated like that and you don't have any, anything going on outside. Karen, were you going to say something? Oh, okay. Okay, you're muted anyways. Okay. But she says to her, what is it? And this is the answer she gives. Chrissy says, "You know what? Listen, look at him. What does he do for a living? He manages other people's money. How significant is that in the world?" And she looks at her daughter and she realizes her daughter is doing something that all people do when they want to get a divorce. They demonize the other person, whether it's, should happen or not. They demonize them. And she looks at him and she says, "What? Don't blow up your marriage over something like that. Don't blow up your marriage." And she explains to Chrissy, why not? She says, "You know what? You've had 3 miscarriages and you're angry and you're not in the right frame of mind to make a decision like this." And she explains to her daughter from her own experience. She says, I'm so sorry for the way William and I behaved. And she says, "Try to learn from my experience. She never would have had her affair if William hadn't had so many." And she says, when she had her affair, it was because she was suffering the loss of her parents, the loss of the girls going off to college. She says, "You know what? Chrissy is responding to the loss of her babies, of her miscarriages, and she's turning it in a really wrong direction." And of course, we never know, do the kids listen when you tell them something like that or not? So what happens with Chrissy?
She stays, I think. Doesn't she stays in her?
She does.
Yeah.
She doesn't get together with that guy. She doesn't. She was supposed to meet with him the next day.
Right.
And I love it because she comes back and she says, "No, I got together with him and I told him no." And then later, I think Becca says, "And you know what else she said? He has a lot of blackheads on his nose."
Oh,
In
yeah.
other words, it's like all of a sudden she was able to see him.
He wasn't attractive.
Yes, all of a sudden she sees him realistically, not out of the eyes of loss and anger and whatever else she's feeling, but she sees him realistically, the way he really is. I'm going to ask you a question. In what ways do you think, well, okay, by the way, before we leave the relationship with the daughters, what I love is another thing. At one point she calls, now Becca is heartbroken over the divorce from Trey, but then she meets somebody else and Lucy thinks to herself, "Oh, this could probably end in heartbreak," because a lot of times, that person on the rebound, it doesn't work. But she doesn't say anything to her daughter. But then she keeps trying to call Becca and Becca doesn't call back. And finally she reaches out to Chrissy and she says, "Chrissy, I don't know what's wrong. Your sister is not responding to me." And I love what Chrissy says to her. And I wish I could find it in my notes. Okay, here. Chrissy says, "Mom, the bottom line is She doesn't need you anymore the way that she did. You did your job. She's on her way. And Lucy says, yeah, it's great, but it sort of killed her. The idea that her daughter was pulling away. So one of the things, when I listened to the author speak about her book, one of the things she wanted to talk about in this book is the relationship of parents with kids. And all of us can relate, I think, to the idea that it's wonderful when they feel close to us and everything. And when do they usually reach out to us the most? When? What? Yes.
When they're hurting.
They're hurting, when they need you, when they need something, they're reaching out, right? And thank God, when everything is pretty stable, maybe you don't hear from them quite as much or whatever. But as a parent, when kids start to pull away a little bit, there is that feeling of a little bit of a feeling of loss as a mother. And she really does a good job of showing how relationships in all ways with William, with the kids, it's sort of like the tide, and she uses it like the tides. It sort of ebbs and flows, right? This is how relationships are. And we're going to see that in another very powerful image at the end, the idea of ebb and flow. Okay. So how did you relate to Lucy? Did you see her as sort of being a lot like most people? In what ways was she, if you think so?
Well, she was concerned about her family.
Very concerned about her family. She looks at Becca at one point and she realizes that she's too skinny. You know, she looks at her, she's just like mothers, you know, you look at your kid and physically you're looking to make sure they look okay because it's how healthy they are. Yeah. What else? I love at one point she says to William, you know what? I don't understand. The kids are calling you more than they're calling me. And he says, you know what it is? They don't want to share a lot of their worries because they know how much you worry. And she says, well, you worry too. And he says, yes, I do worry too, but I don't let it show as much as you do. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Okay. All righty. What about Bob Burgess? Why is she drawn to this guy, Bob Burgess, this friend who rents the house for them? Nice guy. And what you need to know also, because she tells us, what's the history with Bob Burgess? You guys remember? It was interesting. The interesting part of it is that Bob Burgess was married to Pam Carlson. Pam Carlson
Was something with William. Right.
Had an affair with him.
Affair with William.
Bob Burgess never supposedly knew. He never found out. And he is a really nice guy. And when I was listening to the author talk about her characters in one of the interviews, she loves Bob Burgess. He is a great guy. And he comes across like a great guy, doesn't he, in the story? So he's the one that, oh, by the way, we didn't even mention this. It's very poignant when William breaks down and he tells Lucy, why does he wash his jeans every couple days? He shares with her he had prostate cancer.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That? And and she realizes what's painful about that is that he was so lonely. He never shared with anybody the fact that he had cancer, the fact that he had had major surgery and he was incontinent. And later we learned he was also impotent. But you realize how heartbreaking. And I remember there was a beautiful line in there where she says she really did never, she was weeping for him because she realized how sad it was that he was so lonely, that he had nobody to share this with all his affairs, with all his marriages. There was nobody that he shared it with until she confronted him and said, why do you keep washing your jeans every couple days?
But when she found out, I think she found out that he was impotent when they were in bed. And she said something, don't worry, we'll work it out.
Yes, exactly.
Which I thought was nice of her, you know?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So why is what's with her friendship with Bob Burgess?
He's her confidant. I
He's
think
her
she
confidant.
confides in him with everything.
He does. The
Yeah.
friendship that they develop is so strong that she confides all this stuff in him, and he opens up and confides in her. In fact, it's cute that he smokes cigarettes with her, which he won't do with his wife,
With
his
his-
current wife.
Yeah.
And she likes the wife. She thinks the wife is a pretty okay person, but she loves being alone with Bob Burgess because they are such very dear friends. They're so close that at one point one of the girls says to her, "Ma, you're not going to have an affair with him, are you?" And she says, "Of course, no." But they have such a very close friendship because mostly he is so kind. He's so kind. And he tells her that he loved her memoir, that she had written, one of the books she wrote. And she thanked him, and they talked about the book, and he really got what she was trying to say. In fact, he got whatever she was trying to tell him, and she loved that he made her feel so less lonely. During COVID, most of us really were stuck in our own little, what do we used to call them?
Pods.
Our own pod, exactly. And here was a guy that he wasn't really in her pod. William was her only pod. But when they would meet, they would still stay the 6 feet away from each other on a bench or whatever with their masks on, and they would walk together but apart. But they were able to share all of these things, and he was such a dear friend, mostly because he was there for her. And she tells William, "I really love being with Bob." And what we start to see is that Bob really listened to her and he heard what she was going to say. And a lot of times William didn't. She realized, William never was a great listener to her. But here Bob is listening to her and she feels heard with him. And he understands her sadness about Christy's miscarriages. And actually, they have very deep conversations. I remember he asks her, he's the first person to ever ask her, "Do you believe in God?" They have a whole conversation about God and free will. And when they leave each other, their arms are always wide open. And he says, "Big hug to you, Lucy." And she has her arms wide, and to you too, Bob. Like a big hug. You can't really touch each other during COVID. Lucy had a very difficult childhood, which also impacted on her, how she was. What do you remember about her childhood? Yes, very poor. Very cold every night, laying in her bed, cold. Sandra? Yeah, go ahead.
Her father was cruel to her. He left her in the truck.
Yep.
But it's interesting, reading the other book, and seeing the relationship that she had with her mother then, that wasn't great, but her mother did come through for her in the first book. So I think that's another reason why she still thinks of her as the good mother.
That she thinks of her, I was thinking that she was having to make up that good mother.
No, the mother did something for her that was very nice, and she didn't expect it.
Right. So in other words, she was so conflicted. She had the mother that was abusive in the same person as the woman that came through.
Her mother came through for her when she was an adult.
Right. So that's how she would call on the good mother, right? On that mother, as opposed to the mother she knew from childhood, early childhood. But it was so sad when she talked about her brother Pete, right? Do you remember that story with Pete? She felt very guilty about him. He'd stayed in that house.
He stayed with the parents, I think, and she probably felt guilty leaving.
She left him behind in that house with the parents, in that little house. He said he social distanced for 66 years. And of course, ultimately, the irony is he goes for Thanksgiving to the sister Vicky's house. He's the one that catches COVID and dies from it, right?
Right.
She's quite heartbroken about that. But one of the things that also plagues her is a memory from their youth. Now, when he got sick, she says to her brother on the phone, "You must go to the hospital. You really are sick with COVID. You must go to the hospital." And he will not go to the hospital. And later, she thinks to herself of why he wouldn't go to the hospital and why he wouldn't go to a doctor. Do you remember something that the mother did in his childhood that impacted him so greatly? Lucy remembers. one day she came home from school and she sees her brother on the floor, and the mother had stuck pins in
Oh,
his
yeah.
arm. Remember that scene? Pins up and down his arm. And, you know, he was whimpering and wailing and whatever. That's what she's remembering. And she thinks to herself, of course, even when he would go for like a regular shot, he would never be able to tolerate a regular shot from a doctor. She realizes that's probably why he wouldn't go to the hospital. So here she's got this brother that she feels guilty about. She's got a sister, Vicky, who lived in a town close to the brother Pete. But this is a girl that she had to send money to, right, every month. And the girl resented her. This sister always resented her, thought she was selfish. So she has guilt about her sister. So she never really had a very happy childhood. In fact, she says her childhood was a total lockdown. She never saw anyone. She never went anywhere. It was a childhood of isolation, no friends, fear, and loneliness. That's really what she knew as a child. And then she thinks, and I thought this was really an interesting thing too, as she's reflecting on a lot of things. Her sister's daughter, Vicky was the sister's name. Her sister's daughter wins a scholarship, the same exact one in high school that Lucy had won, which enabled her to go to college. Remember this?
Right. Yeah.
Sister goes off to the college, and the next thing is what happens. Instead of going on and becoming successful like Lucy did, what does she do?
She goes home to the family.
Goes
and
home
she
to-
winds up working in the, was it an assisted living?
Yeah. She never really can better herself, right? And so Lucy is sort of these musings that she thinks. She thinks, who knows why people are different? We are born with a certain nature, I think.
Yeah.
And then the world takes its swings at us. Great. The world takes its swings at us. And she couldn't handle school, and she ends up leaving. Yeah. So she notices that. I love the effect that nature had on Lucy. She's affected by the weather. She's affected by the tides as they come in. The cold and bleak weather, we talked about mirroring her feelings. Beautiful weather, it gave her a sense of well-being when the weather was good. When winter came, she felt so low. And she hated it also because at winter time it was hard to get together with Bob Burgess. It was just too cold for them to meet and sit outside together. So not only were her feelings affected by the weather, but also by the people that she met. So I want to talk to you about that. There were people and things that affected her. She was greatly affected by what? Think about current events. What affected her?
George Floyd.
Floyd.
She's remembering things in her own life, right? A man that she saw beaten, a black guy that she saw beaten, a black woman who got lost going to a conference and came back to the conference and said, oh my God, it's so scary to be a black woman at night in Alabama. You know, she's thinking about all of that. She's very aware of social class, of poverty, and in her writing, she writes about the haves and the have-nots. And what other things does she remember? What else made a great impact on her?
The attack on World Trade Centers.
One
What?
was it
No.
the World Trade Center?
She said,
Yeah. Because again, I know. Yes, because she's thinking about all the whole idea of the division in the country. And she senses that in so many ways, what she sees on TV, what she reads in the news, and she sees it. And even when she goes for ice cream, she sees that there are guys there that are wearing masks, guys that aren't wearing masks. She sees this division. This guy pulls up in his sports car, and these other guys are looking at him, and they're the ones not wearing the mask, and the guy is wearing a mask in the sports car. She sees this division in the country. And she says that the chill wind of civil unrest surrounded her because she's very aware of the division in the country. She sees it. She also, I love this thing. She's in the long line at the grocery store. Do you remember the impact that has on her?
About the old man who nobody let get ahead, or
she sees the old man, and it's a really long line, and it's really cold outside, and everybody's standing in this line, and she thinks to herself, wow, it would be really nice if he didn't have to stand at the back of the line. And she's thinking about it, and the next thing is she does nothing about it. But then a woman 2 places ahead of her, about her age, did it.
Yes,
She went, motioned to the man, and the little elderly man came and got in the line. And what did she do, this girl? She went to the back of the line.
Yeah.
She took a place in the back of the line. And what I love about this story is that Lucy says, I learned something that day. I learned something about myself. I learned something about other people when it comes to self-interest. I will never forget that I did not do it for that man. So she realizes she really, her self-interest came first, and she realizes that about herself. So these are all, every interaction that she talks about in this book, it's like somebody said, a series of vignettes. All of these things are not connected to one another, but they are all connected to Lucy, because from all of them, she has learned something. She has grown. And one of the ones that she talks about a lot is her interaction with Charlene Bibber. Now, Charlene is the one who does cleaning in the assisted living, right?
Where Olive.
That's right, where she meets Olive.
Right.
And it's funny because Charlene does something that Olive told her that she did. She goes ahead and hides a shoe from one of the clients, one of the patients. And of course, what's so awful about it is that she hides the shoe, probably with the intention that she's going to give it back to this poor lady, Ethel, or whatever her name was. But in fact, they have all of a sudden the COVID lockdown. She doesn't get back for about 3 weeks. And she's thinking to herself, I'll give Ethel the shoe back when I get back. But what happened to Ethel in the meantime?
She died.
Yeah, she died. So she never gets to really give it back. So Charlene tells the story about, the shoe. Anyhow, she and Charlene strike up this friendship, and they start to go for walks. But what's interesting about Charlene that Lucy notes and is quite amazed by, because Charlene volunteers at the food pantry. So right away, William says, wow, funny, Charlene is a cleaner, and yet she also volunteers. Like somehow it didn't go together, that someone from that socioeconomic group would also be volunteering. Mm-hmm. So he himself realizes, oh, that's the wrong thing to think. Why would I make a stereotype like that? But he did, right? So what's interesting, she later finds out that Charlene has a bumper sticker on her car, and who does she support?
Trump.
The current president, they call it, the current president. So she realizes here's this woman that supports Trump, works as a cleaning lady, but still volunteers in the food pantry. So right away, what does she start to realize about this lady? And they get together and they take these walks and they sit on the bench together and they talk. And I love what they talk about, by the way. What do they talk about? Do you remember? Mm-hmm. Lucy says to her, I'm afraid I'm losing my mind.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And then all of a sudden it's great because then Charlene says, oh my God, I am too.
Yeah.
And I love that because during COVID, didn't we all kind of feel a little brain fog? Didn't we all, and don't we always worry about losing our minds? And so she says that. And of course they talk about it because Charlene works in this assisted living where unfortunately a lot of people go, quote, over the bridge, meaning they have to go into, more help because their minds are going. So of course they both talk about that. They talk about things they have in common. And what do we start to realize? And what does Lucy start to realize from this friendship?
Maybe that the connectiveness with people from different walks of life.
Exactly. And that's what Lucy learns. And that's what Elizabeth Strout, the author, wants us to see also. They are joined together by their commonalities, what they're worried about, losing their minds, or, just the commonalities, volunteering in the pantry. But yet it's interesting because Charlene can't continue volunteering. You remember why? She refuses to get a vaccine.
Yeah.
So you see where she's really, what do we want to say, a Trump supporter, a Trump believer,
Anti-vax.
whatever
Right.
you want to say. And yet, here's Lucy, who's quite liberal, and yet they've really formed this friendship together. And you see where their commonalities were there. Okay, so now I want to talk about the end of the book. Because what happens at the end? How does Lucy change? How does she change?
I think she becomes more secure.
More secure. Yep. What else?
Well, she talks about becoming a different person.
How so?
I don't remember. I took some notes, but I don't remember something with being a writer and what it's like to be a different person. And as a writer, how she has to put herself in someone else's shoes when she's writing. Right. And she feels now that she's becoming a different person too.
Exactly. She all of a sudden can write. She's able to write again. And that's a major thing. And I love the story that she writes about the white policeman. Remember that? She writes a whole story. And so we see right away, by the way, she's in her story. You see a lot of what you're talking about with the idea of Trump supporters, the white policeman. She's actually afraid to publish her story because it's sympathetic to the white policeman. And she's worried about doing that. But she's secure enough that finally she does ultimately do it. But what we see with her is that she's adapted to her life during COVID. She's learned a lot about herself from COVID. She has moved forward in adapting herself well enough that she's adjusted to William again. She starts to see him in that he's now familiar to her. And yes, he might not listen to every story she wants to tell him at dinner, but that's how he is. And she's able to adapt to that. And she's able to see the good along with the negative. So we see that she's adjusted to that. And she's really had this period of personal growth. And what about William? How do we see him changing? At the end, I love that he says to her, you know what? I have been an idiot. I was really stupid the way I've lived my life. So first of all, he feels guilt about the money he took years ago from his grandfather, the money that was made off the German submarines. So he's going to give that now to Maine, the University of Maine, to do a program.
Yeah.
Oh, the potatoes.
Potatoes. On potatoes, something to do with the potatoes.
Because he's now become very close with his sisters, his half-sisters' children, and they are running the potato farm. So now he's going to help in the science department of the university, give money to them so they can talk about, and he's a parasitologist, by the way. Remember, that's the field of science he's in. So he's now going to really work on that, how to grow healthier potatoes. Okay, so he's going to do that. That's number one. But he realizes in his personal life that he has made a lot of mistakes. And he makes it up to Lois, his half-sister, the guilt he feels. And of course, he's tried very hard to do the right thing by his children, do the right thing by Lucy. And Lucy starts to realize that the real home that she ever had, it wasn't her apartment in New York, even the one with David. She shared that apartment with him. What was the real home she had?
Probably with William.
With William.
With the children.
William and with the children. Exactly. And she starts to realize that was the home she had. And she starts to realize that she can accept a lot of things with him. And this is what I wanted to tell you. Remember when I was talking about the ebb and flow of relationships? So I love this image at the end. She says that she once saw a movie, and before the movie began, there were little dots all over, little ping pong balls that were all over. I think we've all kind of seen that. And then once in a while, the one ball would hit the other, another one would hit, and it was kind of
Oh, the
like
ping pong balls,
ping
yes.
pong balls, right? She says people are like ping pong balls, like the ones she saw in the movie, how they bounce into each other and then they bounce off, randomly hitting one another. If we're lucky, we bounce into someone, but we always bounce away again, sometimes a little away, sometimes further away, sometimes like with David, very far away. But she thinks of Charlene, her friend, and you know what? Their ping pong balls touched, even briefly. Um, and that's how life is, you know, the idea of ping pong. I thought that was such an interesting image.
Yeah,
Just we
I,
all connect with one another, right?
I thought she was using the ping pong balls as a metaphor for life.
Exactly, exactly. A metaphor for life and a metaphor for the relationships that we make in life. And what you hope is that each of those relationships adds something to your life, right? And that's really what she's saying. In the end, of course, what also is very interesting about the ending, he calls her the last paragraph. William calls. He's gone off to his apartment. Now she's in an Airbnb or whatever. She's had this lovely reunion with her daughters, and you know, she's developed a mature relationship with her daughters. They are now mature women, which in My Name is Lucy Barton, they were younger girls. And now the author wants us to see that they are mature women that are making a lot of mature decisions and living lives that go one way or the other, but they're their lives. They belong to them, to these mature women. And of course, in the end, he says he wants to sleep over with Lucy. And the last scene is of the two of them. And she says, oh, yeah, this is what we look like, old people on a sidewalk of New York. And then she says, a tiny shiver of foreboding passed through me, then a shiver of foreboding for myself and the entire world. And I stood there on the street, holding on to this man as though he were the very last person left on this sweet, sad place we call Earth. So, what do you think she means when she's holding him at the end? So now, like, it looks like happy ending, right? They're getting together. And then she ends it with this shiver of foreboding. Where's this coming from and why?
Well, the girls told her not to trust him.
Why?
You know, that he doesn't have a good track record with the relationship.
Right. And they're worried. From the very beginning, they were worried he was manipulating her by taking her to Maine because he was lonely, because he needed someone, because he wanted someone to be with his sister. That's what the girls were originally worried about. And he does have this track record. So that goes through her mind, do you think? Okay. And what does she mean by foreboding for the entire world? I think it's exactly what she sees when she sees the divisiveness in the world. Remember, she talks about that with the 9/11, with the people wearing masks, the people supporting Trump, all the different divisions that there are. And I think that's what she's talking about, this foreboding, a shiver of foreboding for the world. So when she goes into this relationship, how do you foresee this going? If you were to say, how do you think it's
with
going?
William? You mean with William? I think it's a comfortable relationship for her. She probably just go back to maybe not the way it was, but she's kind of resigned herself to the fact that she feels probably safe.
Feel safe with him. What else? What do you guys think?
I like the relationship, how it changed, and they both seem to have learned. I wasn't worried about him. I didn't think he was manipulating her. I thought he finally looked back and he got smarter.
Yeah. Keep in mind, he was 71 when this happened. So what do you think also happens with aging and everything? I think, do you look
You-
back
You mellow, people mellow. They,
mellow? So what really, I think what the author is really telling us here is that the one thing that COVID did is it made us all really appreciate that which was important in our lives. You know, think about it. Everything else was put to the side.
Mhm.
No matter how materialistic you were in your life, I mean, other than ordering from Amazon, there was there was nothing there. There, all of the sidebars, all of the things that take our attention were stripped away during COVID. And so what you really came to realize is that which was important to you. So what we have the feeling at the end of this book that I felt like she's going into it with her eyes open. And yet it was comfortable for her. And he was offering her a safe space. And she was ready to take it, you know.
I think she realized all her mistakes as well. And that was important.
Right. Yeah.
And so did William.
And so did William.
Regretted all the affairs and what, you know.
Right. Right. But I loved, to me, the takeaway. Well, what would you say is the takeaway from the book?
Hmm.
You get older and you get smarter.
By the way, exactly. You get it. Yeah. I mean,
And my husband's name is William, and now I must say that 1,000 times. Oh, William.
Oh, oh, William.
William. Oh, William. Okay.
Yeah.
That's cute.
Yeah. I think that, you know, it's funny because one of my groups I did this with, they said, well, you know, in the beginning when we first talked about the book, they said, well, nothing really happened. And then when we finished the conversation, we all said, oh, you know what? A lot happened, but it was all interior. It was all internal growth. And it was kind of cool getting to Lucy's head. The way the author likes to get into other people's heads, we got to get into Lucy's head. And that was really kind of fun. And I think there's really something to say about the fact that the characters have aged in this story. And COVID really did help them to realize what was important to them.
Right.
Anything else we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention about the book?
Yeah, I just like to say, you know, in reading, she had such great life lessons, you know, all throughout the book. You know, it was almost like little platitudes about life, and it was interspersed in little, you know, you might not have picked it up immediately, but it was there.
Well, she did a really good job also because she separated them almost. Did you notice how she did it, the way it was set up in print? They were like, there was a space and then a couple lines after that. Yeah. No, she did that. She did that. She had lovely, I actually made a little note of that. She had some musings that were very interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Could I share one that I wrote down,
yes,
Lynda?
please do. I'm looking for mine. Yeah.
He said the memories were shoved down to where bad memories become scraps of Kleenex in the bottom of a pocket.
Yeah.
Oh.
Right. The idea that memories are shoved down. Yeah. And also there was another one about how we don't realize what we're going to remember, but something does spark your memory of something. You know, you see something on the news or whatever, and that's what happened to her. George Floyd made her think about all kinds of personal remembrances. And it's cute. But how about that comparison that memories are like, you know, Kleenexes at the bottom of your purse. You know, the idea that they, at some point they come out. Yeah. Were there other ones that you had?
Yeah, she said talking about the sunset, that the sun was getting ready for the next day. That's what she described sunset as.
Right. That was like when she talks about autumn tucking itself in at night. No, her writing is lovely. That is really her strength. Yeah, her character development.
And even though, you know, and I felt she was very readable. Like the sentences weren't complicated. You didn't have to reread something to understand it, but very compact the way she writes.
Well, I think, you know what, it really was like somebody sitting down and having that cup of tea with you and having this conversation, you know. Um, her writing is so straightforward, but I love that it's also, Lucy was so honest about the thing, what she was thinking, the negatives and the positives. She shared it all. Anything else, guys, that you want to bring up?
I think that in most of her books, she references characters from other books very subtly, but if you read her other books, you pick up on it, like she did with Olive Kitteridge.
Right. Yeah, and I think it really, and she loves Bob Burgess, and I haven't read the Burgess Boys. Did you? Did
No, but I
anybody?
noticed the titles of some of the other books were like, there was one book called William something. So
Oh,
she
right.
likes to stay with the same characters.
That's exactly right. She does. And you know, it's interesting because somebody said, why did she choose Maine? Uh, and they said it's because Maine, as big as it is, as rural as it also is, the people have a sense of community. And her characters are a community. They're a community of characters where you see where you get to know them all. You get to know Bob Burgess as this really nice guy. You get to know Olive as a real character, a real quirky kind of character. So we get to know all of them. Yeah. And of course,
Can I ask something? I don't remember. Did she know Bob Burgess before? This was the first time she met him.
I think this was the first time she was meeting him. I think so. I know that she knew of him. Not sure she had ever really met him. Of course, she knew of him because she always wondered, did Bob know about the affair that William had with Pam?
Mm.
And, you know, and then Pam, and it's funny because at one point she says to William, I really love Bob. And later on in the story, at the end, when William is becoming quite self-reflective, William says, you know, I really wish I was more like Bob. I wish I had always been more like him. Because he realizes he's a really good guy. And you sense in those comments, that comment, that he's probably really sorry that he snuck around with Pam behind Bob's back. You know, because he had a great affection for Bob. And, you know, Bob really was always to the rescue, rented the house. It was Bob who got him into the doctor to make sure that his PSA was okay after his cancer surgery, you know, to do his checkup, because William had been worried about that. So Bob makes the appointment and gets him to the drives him to the doctor. So you see, Bob is really the guy, the turn two guy, when something was needed. Yeah.
Lynda,
Yeah.
I would just like to recommend to that group, my favorite of all of the books was My Name is Lucy Barton,
Uh-huh.
in case they had not read it.
Yeah, and that's actually the book before the one that we just read.
I read it.
No,
Yeah.
After that came O William and then Lucy by the Sea.
No, but I meant, but my name is Lucy Barton is probably the first in that, you know, I don't know if it's a trilogy or what.
Yeah.
But
You
I
know-
think each book stands on its own, because I read this not realizing there was another book with the same character.
But it is kind of fun, right? To see them grow, to see the characters grow, how they are in the very beginning, how the girls were, Chrissy and Becca were as young girls, and then we see them mature. And all of this is in Elizabeth Strout's mind when she's writing this series. Yeah. You know, kind of made me wonder, are we going to get another book about what went on after with
Or maybe
William
she'll do a book about the daughters.
and about the daughters, conceivably? Yeah. Right. Right. Any other thoughts? You know, a lot of books are coming out about COVID. And for some, like we mentioned in the beginning, for some people, it's almost too soon to relive that. But obviously, it's a very rich background when you're writing a book for an author to talk about COVID. It was such a unique period of time that we all lived through.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also interesting to see how it impacted on the two of them as older adults versus the younger adults, where if you had a weak relationship, it probably broke during COVID. If you had something that tied you together, it could have brought you closer. Interesting. Well, thank you all. I don't know how our timing is, but I want to thank you all for joining us today. And as usual, what a great group. Thank you for your thoughtful comments. And I look forward to seeing you next month. And next month, I don't know exactly what date we're meeting, do we? It's going to be already be in December, huh? So
What's the next book, Lynda?
December 21st, guys, is our book club. And the next one is The Sweetness of Water by Nathan Harris. The Sweetness of Water. Yeah. You can either order it from the library or, the library has a new policy. They used to be able to gather the books for us at the Sterling Road Library, and all we had to do was go there and get them. Now we've got to all order our own books, either from the library. You can call or order online, but they don't get it for us. They'll get it if we order it, but we've got to call them and order it. Okay.
And I have one question.
Yeah.
I noticed that in the upper left of my screen, it says that this is being recorded. Have you recorded the other book discussions? Because unfortunately I was out of town. I missed a few and I'd love to catch up.
Yes, many of them are recorded. Yes, and we do have a list of those that are recorded. So I'm going to, Lainey, I'm trying to think of how to get you that list. The JCC has the list. You could send an email over to the JCC. Is Allie still on? Well,
I have contacted Allie in the past asking for it and it never came.
okay, so I will double check on that for you.
Thank you.
They have your email? They have your email over
I
there.
believe so. I got the email regarding this.
Perfect. Okay, good.
I had the same experience happen. I could not get them, even though it says it's recorded.
Yeah. Did you guys have any trouble finding the link for today?
Mhm.
No,
No.
came to me.
I-
No.
How did you get it? Carol, you did? I had trouble.
Karen had that helped me.
Karen,